All right. Well, the first item of business on our agenda is just an informal conversation with Cody and Alex about the White Birch Campground. And Cody and Alex, I don't know if you're familiar with the Wetlands Protection Act or the role of conservation commissions.
Um,
Only,
I'm not super familiar with the act itself, but I think I have a basic understanding that, there are buffer zones that are ideally enforced, and, the overall goal is not to, destroy wetlands or wreck those ecosystems, and that you have a little bit of ability to flex the rules in special circumstances, but in general, your role is to try and make sure that they're protected and respected.
Yeah, so we can hear what you have to say and what you're proposing, what your questions are, and then we can respond to that. And along the way, you may learn a little more about our role, or at least you'll know what the procedures are, so that if you end up coming before us with a proposal, you'll have some sense of what to expect.
Definitely. So I don't know if Cody, if you're able to screen share. I put together like a little file, just showing, like we went around the campground and we geolocated every single site. And I got the wetlands map that's available online, and I don't remember if it's through FEMA or the GIS, but I got what I could to try and show like our understanding of the site, at least to get a rough concept together for you guys.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's possible for Cody to share his screen or for you guys to see that.
I think I
But
just
what
gave
I
you permission,
found,
Cody, so go ahead.
all right.
um,
So
awesome.
we have two files here, but what Alex had shared
Let me see. It should
was
be
so
the
this
site
is the
map,
overlay with the site map and the wetlands, right? So
right?
you have your
Yeah.
wetlands, you have the
And then
campground.
I've got a list of goals for the campground, right?
Yep.
So
This is the overlay.
you can kind of see, like, from my best guess, trying to kind of compare those side by side. I think we've definitely got sites that are, within the buffer zones. And we certainly have sites that are on the border of the brook itself. But I don't believe we have sites that are explicitly in wetlands, although I understand that that's like an organic moving target. Very happy to, go over there with you guys. It's our goal to, restore this campground and operate it as it was. So, we would prefer not to change the location of anything, and to maintain and repair the existing sites. But I believe on the Board of Health meeting, or maybe the ZBA meeting, there was mention that maybe some of the tent sites might be in wetlands. So what I wanted to see is, with that, if that's the case, could we walk that together, try and get a rough idea of if that's true, and if so, like, say, okay, well, we're probably not going to be able to get them out of the wetlands completely, or out of the buffer zone, but can we, move them out of the wetlands into an area that's as distant as we can get it without, rebuilding the world and doing a ton of site work, and try to maintain the operational capacity of the campground. So when you're looking at the map that we did, the yellow pins are the tent sites, and then red and other colored pins are RV sites, basically.
I don't know if you
So
are still seeing my screen, folks.
Yeah, I can
I
see.
can also email this to you guys. But the yellow dots towards the back of the lot are the ones that I think are like more questionable. I think everything else we're definitely close, but I don't think there's too much besides those that might be in wetlands. I think everything else is going to be, probably some stuff is pretty close to the buffer zones, but I don't think we're going to be directly in wetlands anywhere else, where there might be one or two sites in the tent area that could be.
Let me just interrupt you
And
for a minute
yeah,
if
for
just
sure.
to let you know, since you're on the phone, you wouldn't know
Mhm.
otherwise. But Deb Carney from the Zoning Board of Appeals is here at the meeting, and
Mhm.
so is
Oh,
Brent
hi, Deb.
Jerkes from the Planning Board. So you have representatives from the Planning
Hi, Brett.
Board and the
Oh,
Zoning
cool.
Board here. I'm happy to open up the discussion. It doesn't have to be confined just to the Conservation Commission issues. So just wanted you to know who's there. So there's the five of us on the
Oh, yeah.
commission. there's the conservation agent, Kelly, and then there's Deborah and
Mhm.
Brent.
I had a question on the
Awesome. Well, hey guys.
oh, sorry. The further, I guess I'm looking at the yellow X's, the further ones that are closest to the, I guess it's the brook there. Is there like a dirt road or a pathway there, or are they just like previously marked sites, or are they like newer sites that you're trying to rehab?
Oh, there's sites
So
there.
there are definitely sites there. So there is a gravel road. I believe there's a culvert with part of it, like over part of the brook, or the brook goes through a culvert. I don't
Okay.
100% remember. Because I spent, half a day on the campground so far, inspecting everything. But there's water hookups and there's like flattened out areas. The sites are not super built out, but they're pretty clearly sites, and the road is pretty clear. It all needs cleanup. That's the biggest thing with this campground is there's a lot of cleanup that needs to be
Yeah,
done.
yeah. I'm just trying to just interpret your
There's
map. That just gives me a mental image.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So those yellow dots. There's a couple of sites indicated on like the park map that the seller has that I didn't find as I was there. Like I think there's a couple spots where there might be sites that just no longer have water hookups, and I only marked where there were hookups. So it could be stuff that the seller removed because she wasn't filling it or something. But I pinned everywhere that there was some kind of hookup. And like very clearly a site. And then there's a couple spots where like she has a couple junk trailers and a pile of trash that we would intend to get rid of. And we hope to find water hookups. We'd like to bring them back if we can and use those as sites. Like our number one objective, especially in the first, however many months of operation, if we're able to do some part of the season this year, it's going to be about, removing the junk trailers, removing trash from the campground, removing any hazardous trees. I know there's some concern about the bridge out front, which is definitely in like a wet area. What I wanted to find out, if it would be possible, is, there's concern on whether that bridge is strong enough for a fire truck to go over it. And my thought was that a very simple solution would be to replace it with a large concrete culvert, which would still allow the river to flow, but we could widen the road a little bit and get rid of this concrete bridge spanning 20 feet and make something that's very obviously, going to be structurally sound. But I know that that is like definitely in an area that's either in or very adjacent to wetlands. So I don't know what the process might look like to propose and try to get that approved. But that's something that I was hoping to explore because I think it would be a very simple solution. For that question of the bridge's structural integrity.
So for the Conservation Commission issues and jurisdiction, I guess the first thing I would say is that the maps of wetlands that you can find on Mass Mapper and others are not official and they're based on aerial photo interpretation rather than field delineation and generally underrepresent the amount of wetlands that are likely to be there. So one of the first things that you need to do if you acquire the property is hire somebody to delineate all of the wetlands on the property so that we have a good solid map. We would come out and review the delineation. Once we've agreed on the boundaries of the wetlands, then you have a better sense of what you have to work with. There's clearly upland areas that can be utilized on the site. They're currently being utilized, but it's hard for us to be able to say, what you can and can't do right now without a firmer idea of where the wetlands are. The culvert crossing that you talked about, people replaced crossings. That is in an area that floods extensively. It's very wet. The wetlands are much larger than what are shown on that map now. And so generally culvert replacements need to meet stream crossing standards, which means that a concrete box culvert could potentially work, but it would have to be embedded. It'd have to be countersunk into the ground and a stream channel constructed inside it. Sometimes we recommend that people go with an open bottom structure, like an open bottom box that retains the stream channel in a more natural state. But because it's going to flood there, you're dealing with floodplain too. So, having an extra wide crossing would help pass the water and prevent it from damming up on the upstream side. Those are just thoughts. Those are not like anything hard and fast that you can take to the bank. It's just that those are issues that we would consider. Those are questions we would likely ask about if you came before us with a design to replace that crossing.
Got it. Okay.
I have a question, Scott.
Um,
Is there different standards?
mhm.
Like if saying a lot of them are like tent site, is that like a more minimal disturbance than having like a motor vehicle? Is there like different standards for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's for us to consider what the likely impacts would be. So, the way the wetlands regulations are set up is there are what are called resource areas, which are areas that are protected by the Wetlands Act. Those would include streams, ponds, wetlands, floodplains, and land within 200 feet of perennial streams. So whether they're actually wet or not, the areas within 200 feet of that stream that's out front are protected areas. And then
Mhm.
adjacent to intermittent streams and ponds and wetlands, there's a 100-foot buffer zone. And we can regulate activity within that 100 feet, but it's with the intention of protecting the resource areas, the wetlands and the streams. So activities can occur within that 100 feet. We generally like to see some buffer from the edge of the stream or the wetlands, but it's not prohibited. It's just that it's often misunderstood what that 200-foot zone is that's going to be along the Bloody Brook that runs near the road. That's a protected area, so we would want to limit the amount of work that occurs within that 200-foot zone. Where
That
there's
makes sense.
already disturbed areas, there's more flexibility to sort of upgrade and reuse areas that are already developed. So previously developed areas, can be reused, and areas that like those tent sites, if they're in the buffer zone of that smaller stream or wetlands that are there, there is some flexibility to allow some use in the buffer zone.
Mhm. That makes sense. A question on that note. So, in general, our intention here is to, repair and maintain a pre-existing campground. My understanding of the code would be that there's like that can be done by right. What is it that you guys would want to see, like wetlands delineation and full applications for? Like, what type of work is gonna require that?
So the way it's set up is like if you're maintaining a structure, like if you're, repairing a roof on a structure or, painting it or, repaving a driveway that was paved, that stuff is maintenance of existing structures. But if you're going to do a tear
Right.
down and a rebuild, that's something that would fall in
Mhm.
our jurisdiction. If you're within a resource area, in most cases, you'll have to file what's called a notice of intent, which is essentially a full
Mhm.
application for a permit. If you're in
Mhm.
the buffer zone, there's another filing that you can put forward called a request for determination of applicability, where that's an official request to the commission to determine whether a permit is necessary. And if you're very close to the boundary of a wetland or a stream, you're more likely to get a yes. You are subject to the Wetlands Act and you do need to file a notice of intent. If you're like more than 50 feet away and the ground is level, we generally issue negative determinations, and sometimes with the condition that if certain work concerns us, that you have silt fence or other
Mhm.
erosion control in place when you do the work.
Mhm.
So
That makes sense.
it depends on whether you're in the buffer zone or whether you're in one of those resource areas, which includes floodplain and also that 200-foot
Mhm.
riverfront area along the perennial stream.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess as far as like all the existing sites, if we're not making any changes to them and all we're doing is like cleaning them up, getting rid of any dead trees that are a hazard to campers, is there any reason why we would not be able to just, use the campground as it was previously used?
I don't imagine that there's going to be a problem unless there's work in wetlands that shouldn't have ever been allowed. But um, there are also sort of trade-offs that can be made. Like if you need a little bit of room here, and you're willing to give up something somewhere else so that on balance it's a wash or it's an improvement for the environment, we have some flexibility around that. But reusing the same areas for the same purpose without expanding it or significantly changing the nature of the land and the land use, there's probably you'd have an
Mhm.
expectation that that would be allowed.
Okay, so I guess my question there, something that you said does alarm me a little bit, because you said if something was improved that never should have been allowed, and we're purchasing the campground with the intent to use what's there, and if
Mhm.
if we were told, after buying the campground, oh, those 30 sites are too close to the wetlands, you can't operate that. That would destroy our business model, So this is like something that I want to understand because we went there and walked it, and it's mud season, so there are some wet areas. But overall, I mean, to me, logically looking at it, everything seemed reasonable to operate as is. But like, if we bought the campground tomorrow, and then we're told that we could only operate half the sites because they're too close to wetlands, I mean, that would be very much not okay for us, for our business. Like, if that's the line, this just like kind of makes it impossible for us to invest into this park. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I understand.
Like,
It's
we do want to improve it, but we can't afford to go into a situation where we're going to be told after spending a bunch of money, oh, well, you just can't actually operate that.
right. So we can't really say much about things we haven't seen. So
Yeah.
like if there are
Okay.
campgrounds in the wetlands, we
Hmm.
can't ignore that. That's not supposed to be, you shouldn't be camping in a wetland. If you're talking about next to a wetland, then we have to look at,
Yeah.
whether there's some adverse impact happening because those campsites are where
Yeah.
they are. Um,
Okay.
but if you're not in the wetland, there's probably something that could be arranged, but whether it's all that you want to do or part or most of what you
Yeah.
want to do, hard for us to say.
Yeah.
So
That makes
normally
sense.
what we would recommend is that you hire a wetlands consultant, somebody like Ward
Yeah.
Smith, who comes out and he can tell you where the wetland boundaries are. He can look at how close the campsites are. He's come before us multiple times. He could probably give you some good advice and say, yeah, I think they'll probably let you do this, but this over here, this is the one that worries me. Get some professional advice because we can't really say a lot to you informally.
Yeah.
We can go and look at
Yeah.
the site, but we can't discuss with you how we would possibly decide. That has to happen at a public
Yeah.
meeting. So we can't
Hmm.
give you the
Okay.
same level of advice that somebody like Ward could give you.
That makes sense. I mean, I would honestly, if you're willing, I would really appreciate if we could, set up a time to meet there, just because, obviously we're sort of locked up in contract in like a gridlock position, and we don't want to like string Mrs. Reed and her husband along, but we also don't want to, spend a bunch of money on the campground or spend, a bunch of money on engineering without really having like a fairly good idea of what we're getting into. I definitely, appreciate the suggestion. We'll definitely reach out to Ward Smith. But if you'd be willing, you or somebody on the commission to take a look, just to give us like a rough idea, like sacrificing a couple of tent sites is not such a big deal. But the RV sites with their infrastructure that's pretty expensive and hard to rebuild and hard to relocate. So that to me is more concerning of, just eliminating that as something that we might get hit on. Because like you can squeeze tents in kind of anywhere, but the real RV sites are a little bit tougher. And we definitely want to try to, use what's there because the cost to redevelop it, depending on the scope of that could end up being, more than the park is currently worth. In some situations, and we do want to be able to improve the park. And so that it would be super helpful if we could try to get at least a rough idea of what we're walking into.
I've done a lot of the talking because I can give you what the regulations say and what the procedures are. But in terms of
Yeah.
a question like that, let me open it up to other commissioners and ask what you think.
Yeah, like I said, we usually just go by like what we know. If we can see the wetland, we're like, yeah, that's what we do. Like I said, even if we look at it, we're usually waiting for like you said, like Ward Smith to give us like a general idea of what is the wetland. The lines are, and then we can just go from there because we have no idea what this, what the site is like.
Mhm.
Other commissioners have anything you want to say
I think
or any questions you have?
based on what Scott said about, we can't have a discussion with you outside of a open meeting, so I think your best bet is to do, get somebody like Ward Smith to, do the survey. And,
Well, the other question that I have to that is, I'm sure you can understand a large parcel like this, that's a very substantial, cost. And we're not even really looking to make any changes to it. So that's what I'm trying to understand is like, like in order for us to do that, like in order for us to like at this point to buy the property, we have to spend a bunch of money, engage someone who's going to take a while to get this done, string the reeds along, have no idea where we're really at. And then, whereas like if you guys would be willing, I think there's definitely some amount of like ability here to look at it and say, oh yeah, I see what you mean. That looks reasonable. Like we are really trying to make a plan to improve this park, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to us to spend a bunch of money on something that's totally like uncertain, especially when our intention is not to change it, and my understanding of the law is that if we're not changing it, we should be able to operate as is. And, we really are not in a position to outlay a bunch of cash, unnecessarily. And like, I would really just appreciate if you guys would be willing to take a look at this with us, because we're really trying to make this park better, but it doesn't make sense to us to spend a bunch of money at this stage. And like we're just kind of in a really bad situation here.
Grant,
Well,
go
I
ahead.
think there's a certain.
Oh, go ahead, George.
This is George Owens, another one of the commissioners. I think there's a certain amount of due diligence you need to do in any commercial transaction like this, where you need to get some professional advice on the conditions of the property, so you know exactly what you're getting into. That's not really something we can do informally, and we do rely on experts in wetland science to delineate, to take a look at things and to provide that input impartially.
Grant, go ahead.
Thank you, Scott. So my name is Brant Chaikas. I'm the chair of the planning board. I'm not here representing the planning board. But I'll just make some comments based on some knowledge of zoning. If Cody could stop sharing, and then if I could be allowed to share my screen, I really want to make sure that Alex and Cody are aware of how state law related to the floodplain from FEMA affects this particular property, and in particular, any efforts to rebuild that bridge. So just let me share this. Let me share this map, which is a little out of date. I know, Alex, you can't see it because you're just on the phone. So Cody's going to have to be your eyes. Cody, you can see what I'm sharing, and I'll explain it. Cody?
It's up now.
You
Cody?
couldn't find my unmute button. Yes, I can see what you're sharing.
Okay, very good. So this little area, you sort of see my mouse. This is around where your campground is. And these blue areas, and you can see the roadway that connects the campground to North Road, and where that bridge is, falls within the regulatory floodplain, the 100-year, the 1% flood zone designated by FEMA. And this is somewhat old data, and it is indeed being updated by FEMA. But Whately's zoning by state law and basically driven by federal law tends to strictly limit development taking place within these regulated floodways, these blue areas that you're seeing here. And I just want, first of all, I want you to be aware of this and say this is yet another thing you may need to consider when it comes to rebuilding that bridge. Because I'll point out that in Whately's current zoning, we have a bylaw, the Flood Hazard Overlay District Regulations bylaw. So this, your bridge and that, the roadway and the bridge are in the floodway, in our Flood Hazard Overlay District. And thus Flood Hazard Overlay District regulations apply. We have a clause in that bylaw, and I'll just read this, just so you're aware. And this may or may not, this is just another thing for you to consider and maybe seek professional assistance about. But here's the clause. Within the floodway designated on the flood boundary floodway map, that blue area, no encroachments, including fill, new construction, substantial improvements to existing structures, or other development shall be allowed. So none of that shall be allowed unless it is certified by a registered professional engineer that the proposed development as a result of compensating actions will not result in any increase in flood levels within the town during the occurrence of a 100-year flood. And so this minimally suggests that whatever engineering work is going to be done to rebuild that bridge so RVs and so forth and emergency vehicles can get back and forth, there's going to be some engineering work and certification that, however it's done, will not affect flood levels. And given everything that's been going on with climate change, I can tell you that the town is quite concerned about the risks of floods. And in fact, at this coming town meeting, what I've read to you is a clause in the existing flood hazard overlay district bylaw. But come our upcoming annual town meeting on June something this month, right? June of this year, I should say. We are bringing a brand new floodplain overlay district bylaw before the town for a vote. So right now, this whole conversation about the campground and redoing the bridge and so forth is happening at this awkward time when an outdated bylaw still applies by law, but a new one that will probably be even more restrictive is, in my estimation, very likely to be strongly supported and voted by town meeting this coming June. So things to be aware of. I'm not coming into this with guns a-blazing to say, let's add insult to injury. I don't have a particular opinion one way or the other on this campground. I'm not representing anybody but myself. I'm simply making you aware from a planning board perspective that there is a zoning provision that currently applies, and that will be another thing you'll have to address if you're going to rebuild that bridge.
Understood. Okay. Well, I guess I don't have any other questions at this point. I'll definitely reach out to Wordsmith. I do just have to reiterate, I've come in front of, at this point, I think every board meeting in the last couple of weeks, except maybe the planning board. I've been in front of Board of Health, you guys here in Conservation, Zoning Board, trying to understand the standing of this campground. And the impression that I've gotten is that it's been horribly mismanaged, it's in disrepair, and that overall, folks might like to see it improved. But these hurdles to determine if we would even be allowed to operate it or to, resume the operations of the existing structures there, make this like a really unsafe investment for us. And I will certainly reach out to Wordsmith, but the inability to get clarity on this means that we really have, like, we can only, talk to Mrs. Reed about, this being like 6 more months to close, or maybe 3 if we're lucky, or walking away, because the difficulty to like prove that we can operate the business as it was represented to us makes this a very unsafe investment at this current stage. Like, if I was asked what we were going to do tomorrow, we would unfortunately have to say that we couldn't pursue this and try to improve this campground, which, I was really hoping to get like a little bit more like reassurance at this meeting that overall sentiment would be amenable to us improving the park. But, it seems like we just have to invest a lot more time and energy to know whether or not this is even worth proceeding with. But we'll certainly attempt to do so.
Yeah,
I
Alex.
appreciate your time. Thank you guys for letting us come in today. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Alex, just understand that this is a really difficult site. We're not just hanging you out just because we don't want to be helpful. This site is right up against the Great Swamp on one side, and it's right up against the Bloody Brook and its associated wetlands on the others. A lot of this stuff probably shouldn't be where it is now. And so it's hard to give you reassurance. It's also a site where there's a lot of, like, it's a mosaic of wet and dry spots until it gets to the real solid wetland area. And it's mostly hemlock swamp back there, which makes the soils and the vegetation very difficult to interpret. So if I went out there with you to try to answer your questions, I'd be digging holes all over the place. I can't just look at it and tell you what to expect.
Yeah.
And so you could potentially ask Ward, say, I don't want a delineation. I just want your opinion about what you think the commission will let me do. And let him bring his shovel and let him bring his auger where he needs to do spot checks. And then you might get, somewhat what you're looking for. Is this a good risk or is it not?
Yeah.
But to ask us to spend that kind of time out there to try to help answer your questions, it's a commercial endeavor that you're proposing. There's certain costs to doing that, especially when you have a complicated, difficult site like you're looking at. So I don't want you to just go away thinking that we're uncooperative. This is just ordinary business, and we're giving you an opportunity now to ask us questions that you want. It's just that we're limited in what we can do in the field in terms of reassuring you.
Yeah, I was really operating on the assumption that it would be more feasible to get a look at it and say, oh, that all seems reasonable. But it doesn't sound like that's your understanding of the situation. So I can appreciate where you're coming from. This is a unique one. We've purchased several campgrounds and never had anything like the level of scrutiny, that this one has. So it's a new experience, and not in line with our past endeavors, which is why I'm, a little surprised with this and a little hesitant to pursue it, because it is much more fraught of a situation than we've dealt with in any previous transaction. But I definitely understand, like, you guys can't overcommit either. So I understand that. So we'll definitely have that conversation with Wordsmith, and hopefully he's willing to give us, the 5-minute assessment before we go further with it.
Okay. Does anybody else have any comments or questions? All right. Well, I think it's still useful that you came in and aired this out. I
do appreciate it. I'm grateful to know this now and not after closing. I'd much rather know where the park stands now. So thank you guys for your time.
Okay.
Much appreciated.
All right. Okay, so we'll move on. The next item in our agenda, it's a little past time, but nobody new has jumped in. So we need to continue the hearing for the Haydenville Road project because they're making progress, but they're not quite ready yet. So at this point, all it takes is a quick vote here. Our next meeting is scheduled for the 21st. And so all in favor of extending the public hearing for the Haydenville Road project until May 21st?
Aye.
Raise your hand and say aye. Aye, okay. Sorry, John, we had to hold you up for that extra 30 seconds to get this piece of business out of the way, but now, John, I want to welcome you to the meeting. I forwarded to the rest of the commission and to Kelly the materials that Michael sent us. So they know the description of the situation and they know the sort of illustrations of the plans that you're intending to use. But if you'd like to, for the record, give us a quick overview of what the situation is and what it is you're proposed to do, that would be a good start.
Okay, yeah, sure. So we first got a call from a property owner, Margaret Ryan, at 242 State Road. And what was going on there is apparently what's happened before there was the beavers had blocked a culvert that was going underneath an access road from her house to some old farm fields by the solar fields now. So the water was in her basement. I believe she has town water, but it was causing flooding. She's currently living in New Jersey, the property owner, but her daughter is living there now. So they're trying to figure it out. So they previously hired a trapper who then opened up the culvert for her, but then the beavers just kept blocking it again and again. So he referred her to us. So what we do is we install flow devices. So if you saw the informational sheet, what we were proposing there was we were going to install a small culvert fence in front of the culvert that allows the beavers to dam on the fence but keep the culvert open. And then upstream of there, we have a pipe that runs about 40 feet upstream. The way that works is the beavers don't detect the water going into the pipe. They don't expect it to be running, to be escaping their pond 40 feet upstream of the culvert. So they keep damming on the culvert fence. The problem is if you leave that pipe unprotected, they'd eventually hear or feel the water going into that pipe. So we build a cage around it, and that keeps the beavers far enough away. So we install well over 100 of these a year. We were ready to go with that, but then we got a call from Mass DOT that the road was getting flooded. So we went upstream, and what we saw previously was a beaver dam, and again we saw that the water had risen even higher. So the upstream property owner in another similar road situation had his culvert blocked as well. So we were able to open up both culverts and allow the water level to go down, so there are no flooding concerns. So now we just want to install that type of device for both culverts. So usually, in all honesty, I'm usually not the one that deals with the permitting, but usually the way we go about this is there's a special permitting process where you can go to the Board of Health, apply for an emergency permit, or the Conservation Department to get an emergency permit. And once we get that permit, we're able to go in and install those devices. So that's my quick summary, kind of going through it as quickly as possible.
And to fill out the history a little bit,
Hmm.
Kelly got contacted first about this issue. She wrote to me. We conferred via email, and she went out to the site and took photographs and sent me photographs of the site. I went out to the site as well and saw, what the situation was. And the water was just rising. You've got it's the old Russin Farm house at 242 State Road. There's a road behind that house that crosses the wetland and the stream, and there's a field on the other side. My understanding is that one was blocked, and the road that's north of that at Russ Sinkowitz's access road, that one was blocked, and the water was getting up high enough relative to the elevation of Route 5 and 10 that DOT wanted something done about it. So Kelly talked to John, and I talked to DOT, Kelly talked to DOT. We had lots of conversations about it. And we basically authorized the cleaning out of the culverts in order to lower the water level and to avert the immediate issue. Besides, it was all just maintenance of a structure anyway. But now they want to take it a step further and put in water flow devices to try to make sure that those culverts stay open. And then in addition, you're going to be notching or partial breach on a dam to try to regulate the water levels as well, right? Can you give a little more detail about the partial breach?
Yeah, so that is another access road to the solar panels downstream. The only reason why we're including that is because we were concerned that once we release a whole lot of water upstream and that goes rushing downstream, we didn't want it to affect that access road to the solar farms. So the way that culvert is set is there's really not much airspace. It's set really low. It might have sunken over time. So if strong currents go up against that, it could easily erode the roadbed. So the point of notching that dam downstream is that dam was downstream of that culvert. So we wanted to get a little airspace in there to let the water flow clearly, freely through there, I should say. Excuse me.
This where they built a dam on a fallen log behind the
Yeah.
castaway?
So I haven't gotten back there in a while. There wasn't much of a dam. It was only about 6 inches of damming over the top of the log. So between the log and the 6 inches of damming, there was about a foot of water being held back there. So it's not a whole lot of water. It's not a significant breach, but just that little bit we thought could help. To be honest, Tom Kozik with the Mass DOT is the one that was suggesting that we do that. He was concerned about the road, so they surveyed the whole area, and that was their suggestion.
I remember too,
Yeah,
Scott, would this affect the others? There's a culvert on Christian Lane. Would this breach affect that way? Or is that culvert pretty big?
That culvert was pretty big with a lot of airspace, and there was no damming. And
Okay.
what we had was last year, the beavers were damming on the culvert on State Road as well. So Mass DOT cleared out that culvert and they hired us to put in what we call a decoy fence or decoy dam. And that was just essentially a semicircular fence in front of there to have the beavers dam in front of the culvert instead of inside of it. After we installed that, the beavers ended up not damming there.
Yeah, and
So
it's hard to imagine that we would want to see a dam behind the castaway between the solar access road and Christian Lane. So it's really an improbable place for beavers to be setting up shop anyway. So
yeah,
yeah, so this is the basic layout is that it's going to be two areas with the water leveling devices. One is the road access road behind 242, and the other is Russ Sinkowitz's access road. Is that correct?
yeah, that's correct. The only thing I would add is usually when beavers create a flooding issue, you have two options for solutions. It You could either trap beavers, and when you trap beavers, you legally have to euthanize them, so you can't relocate them to become another issue in town. The problem with that is they often come back within 2 years. Each location is different, so I can't guarantee that here. It sounds like they haven't been living here as often. The other option is to install a flow control device such as this. The benefit of this is you won't have to deal with having to open up the culverts and risk downstream flooding in the future if the beavers move back in.
So, Kelly and I have been involved in this and we've seen it. We've talked to people. Any of you have questions for John or for Kelly and me?
I see that the water is almost gone behind 242.
Yeah, that was because we opened up the culverts. So the culverts were completely blocked, and then the beavers started building dams on top of the roadways as well. So Russ Sinkowitz's property has actually gotten a decent amount of erosion on his road because the water was flowing up and over it
Mhm.
for a while.
And they have a lodge in there somewhere?
Yeah, I believe it's very difficult to access up that way, to go upstream to try to find it, but I believe it's upstream of Russ Sinkowitz's property.
I see.
I don't think it's very well established, though. I walked in there before the water got high because I was trying to get some measurements for bankful width in that area because the Christian Lane culvert needs to be replaced. And I didn't run into it. And so I saw where there was a little bit of water backed up from above the Sinkowitz driveway, but it was nowhere near as wet as it got. And my guess is that they had not gotten well established. The beavers just moved in, plugged everything all up, and
Yeah.
got people's attention pretty quickly.
Well,
Yeah.
we have two beaver deceivers. They did the trick
Yeah.
to stop the flooding, so.
Yeah, and that's the good thing about it is that you can tolerate a certain amount of water level. The beaver deceivers just make sure it doesn't get above that. And you don't have to then, exterminate the beavers. You can, they'll eventually move out on their own if they can't set up a reasonable pond to live in. And some of them might stay in that pond that's already there, but who knows? So yesterday I received the request for an emergency certificate for this so that the work could proceed right away. If we were to require a notice of intent for this, we would have to, they would have to prepare the notice of intent, and then we would have to have it, we'd have to post it in the newspaper. It would have to be, we'd have to have a meeting, make a decision, then there's 2 weeks for the appeal period afterwards, and it just seemed not prudent to let this go that long. So, but since it came in yesterday and we were meeting today, I asked them if they could just wait one more day so that the full commission could weigh in. And so this is your opportunity to ask questions or to make known your opinion about this.
Yeah, see no problem with the emergency certification. That's fine.
Yeah, fine. I mean, the materials you sent out were good, and we've certainly had trouble there before. So, yeah.
I'm good with that too.
It makes sense.
Okay, so officially all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Okay, so an emergency cert can be official with one signature, so I can print it out, sign it, and send it electronically to you, John and Mike. I'll send it to you both. And what it says is it can be one signature as long as the commission then ratifies that decision. So you've just ratified that decision, so there's no need to circulate it for further signatures. We can just let it stand with mine. And I guess that's it for this. Thanks for coming in, John, and being available to answer questions. And I'll get that out tonight so that you can get to work tomorrow. It's supposed to be a nice day tomorrow, so I guess that would be a good day to do the work.
Yeah, it would be great, finally. And thank you, Scott and Kelly. I saw you enter as well on the top of my screen. You two were great and really responsive. So thank you again for that.
Kelly, anything you want to say about this project, this situation?
I think everything's pretty much been covered. I was happy to go down there and, take a look at it when the flooding was really bad.
Yeah, it is great to have an agent because, I had driven by there on my way to work. I went, wow, that water looks high, but I didn't have time to stop. And then when the call came in, Kelly was able to respond right away. She got out there. She could send me photographs. I then stopped by on my way home, but it was great to have somebody who could, assess the situation, the urgency, the need of what needs to happen right away versus what can wait a little bit. So it's working out really well. Thanks, Kelly.
No problem. Happy to help.
All right, let's move on. Next
Thank you.
is the approving minutes from our last meeting. Monty emailed me saying, I'm not sure I actually gave an update on the housing committee, but I couldn't remember either. So one key question is, at that March meeting, did Monty give an update about housing?
I don't think so.
I think she said that they're looking for new members.
Chair, looking for
Maybe that was
chair.
it.
I think
Yeah.
that was it.
All right, I wouldn't say that qualifies as an update, so I'll remove that from the minutes. But in the meantime, you did give me an update via email. Do you want to give that update to the rest of the board?
Oh, sure, I can. So I said, Scott, this would have been the update. Do you remember any of these things? So the update is the Housing Committee has not met since last summer when Catherine Walkowitz stepped down as the chair. None of us wanted to be the chair, and we were done with our big job of developing the what was it called? The affordable housing plan.
Mhm.
So we hadn't met since then, but then and we used to meet we used to have housing committee, and then 4 times a year we also met as the housing trust, all the same people, because we legally we needed to have somebody overseeing the housing trust. And then Peter Kane reached out to the members of the housing committee and said, could you meet, because we're required to for the housing trust. So we did meet, and we decided to try to revive the housing committee. And around that same time, somebody else volunteered to be on the housing committee. Paula, I can't remember her last name. She's not
Jenkins,
Paula Jenkins. Oh, you're still there, Brant.
still lurking.
I thought that was just a picture of your wife.
It is, it's my alter ego, thank
And so we did have that meeting. Judy Markland was there representing the CPC. And we are planning to meet soon as the newly reconfigured housing committee, though I don't think Brant has gotten a response from Paul yet, have you?
I did actually yesterday, and there's a
Okay.
doodle poll out which you can respond to. We're picking dates for a meeting in May.
Okay, so I haven't seen that email yet. It must have come in the last 12 hours.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Like this
I think-
afternoon when I got back to my town business. But
Great. And the only other thing is that none of us want to be the chair, but Brant is the acting interim chair at the moment. We're hoping that somebody volunteers who has some knowledge about housing. That is the update.
All right. Great. So I guess we have to vote to approve the minutes with that change, as I described, to take out any reference to an update. Well, I'll just cut and paste it into today's minutes. So all in favor of accepting the minutes from last month?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. George, do you have any updates about the battery storage committee?
That has all been handed off to Brant's capable hands and the select board. So that committee finished its work, unless we need to come back for any further kind of ad hoc meetings and input. But that's with the planning board. The 2 bylaws, the zoning bylaw is with the planning board now. The general bylaw is with the select board. So it does not appear that either one of those will come to regular town meeting. That's not in the plan.
Yeah.
So they'll be up for special town meeting later in the year at some point.
Yeah.
Am I correct on all that, Brant?
absolutely. So the zoning bylaw is going to come before the planning board for our first real dig into it at our meeting at the end of this month on April 30th. And I have, in fact, today at Jim McGovern's thing, Deborah and I were able to sync up because there was a consensus on this committee that the planning board and the zoning board both really ought to have at least one joint meeting on this bylaw, because by golly, the ZBA is going to have to be on the front lines of doing the special permits for any of these things. And it's well beyond evaluating the things that the bylaw sets us up to have to evaluate. Both zoning and planning are well beyond anything that a resident in town would be able to do. So we'd have to grapple with the idea of being able to hire outside expertise and potentially do that at short notice. I mean, there are a lot of devils in the details that we're going to be looking into. But I think George was right that the committee basically has taken things as far as they can, and it's now over to the select board for the general bylaw and to the planning board and the ZBA for the zoning bylaw.
Great, thanks. Thanks, George. Thanks, Brent. Brent, is there anything else from the planning board perspective that you want to bring up with the Conservation Commission?
You
Or
mean about
update us on?
Well, I mean, not specifically about the battery piece. I mean, I'll simply say that as far as I know, I mean, again, thanks to all of you for your support for the floodplain overlay district bylaw. I fully expect that that is going into the annual town meeting warrant and coming to this town meeting in June. And I, hope that, I'll make some remarks, and of course, maybe if anybody on the Conservation Commission wants to just, we'll certainly say that it's been endorsed by the Conservation Commission as well. I can't believe it will get voted down at town meeting, but who knows?
Oh, I can't imagine it either.
Yeah, not with everybody's concerns about flooding and now wildfires and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, right.
Great.
But I think I don't think there's anything else that pops into my head that's really at the nexus of planning board and conservation commission interests aside from those two matters.
All right, great. Kelly, how about you? Do you have anything you want to bring up, or you want to update people about what you've been up to, or questions you have for the commission?
The only small update I have for this month, is that I've been in contact with the owners of the Rainbow Motel on State Road. They need to demolish the building since they had a fire. And they just had questions about how to do their due diligence with the wetlands that are behind it. And so I've been talking to them about the RDA process, and so I think we should be expecting an RDA from them for next month.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
And another situation where she was able to field the call and pretty much handle it without me having a lot to do with it, except just she asked me what I thought. I told her, and it's wonderful.
Hooray,
Yay!
earning that paycheck.
For sure.
So, any other business from the commissioners? Anything else happening in town that we don't know about? All right. Well, it just turned 8 o'clock, so I guess we can use that as our shut-off point for tonight. If there's no other business, shall we adjourn?
Sure.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. It was a longer meeting than I expected, but we spent a lot more time on the White Birch Campground than I thought we would. But we'll see what happens. Frankly, I don't feel like we need to be in a position of trying to make it happen, because even though that might be an improvement, it is still not an ideal site for a campground. And Brent, you bringing up about the floodplain bylaw was a good save there. That's good. That's a really difficult entranceway too. You're probably going to have to elevate, maybe put some kind of a wider elevated bridge in order to pass the water necessary to not end up with fill in the floodplain.
I appreciate Scott and Brant, both of you communicating those things so clearly.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming out, and we'll see you next month, or probably we'll have a site visit between now and then, it sounds like, so we'll probably see you sooner than that.